Today, I'm going to share with you 3 core strategies to successfully start a psychiatry private practice in 2023. Trust me, if you implement these strategies, you will avoid at least 75% of the mistakes I see when I'm coaching psychiatrists on starting their practices. And by this point, I've coached nearly 100, so I really have seen the most common mistakes. First, a quick introduction. I'm Alana Miller, MD from ZenPsychiatry.com, and I'm an integrative psychiatrist and 2-time cancer survivor, passionate about combining Western medicine, Eastern wisdom, and holistic approaches to help people live fuller and happier lives. I also mentor psychiatrists on integrative psychiatry protocols and business strategies to be successful in private practice. Let's get started. The best strategies for creating a psychiatry practice actually come from the business world, not the medical world. It's not surprising because I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Come closer. A little closer. Tiny bit closer. Doctors are not very good at business. You can't really blame us. We don't learn any business or even finance really in medical school or residency. We learn how to treat patients. The problem is that many of the personality traits and skill sets that make us good clinicians, like perfectionism and conscientiousness, are actually our worst enemies in business. Nothing will hamstring you more than trying to be perfect right out of the gate. The good news for you, if you're watching this video, is that because most doctors aren't very good at business, you really need only be average to be better than most any other psychiatrist out there. So let's hop in with strategy number 3. Start with a minimum viable practice, or MVP. The acronym MVP actually comes from the startup world, from a book by Eric Ries called The Lean Startup. It stands for minimum viable product. So I adapted it from the startup world into minimum viable practice. Genius, I know. His thesis is that software companies make a massive mistake when they build complicated software solutions in advance of actually having customers. Why? Because they build the wrong product, one that customers don't actually care about or want. And when they release it to the world, no one buys. Instead, he advises, build the minimum viable version of your software solution, get early adopters as customers, and then iterate and improve your software based on customer feedback, getting more and more customers along the way. So you want to do a version of this in your practice. Start with a low overhead practice with the minimum tools needed to function, and then improve and optimize after you have your first patients, which also means that you'll have some revenue. I'll let you in on another little secret, which is that revenue solves basically all problems in private practice because you can pay someone to fix the problem for you. If you're not profitable from week 1, you're doing it wrong. You should not be dropping tens of thousands of dollars on whatever just to get started. We're not opening dental practices or surgical practices where you need $100,000 worth of equipment just to get started. This is psychiatry. You need a chair, a computer, and you're basically good to go. We have the advantage of being able to open our practices and see our first patients for minimal cost, so we should take advantage of that fact. Now, this will make the most sense to you if I explain first what not to do. So I once knew of a colleague who was starting a practice, and she had this expansive goal in mind of what she wanted to do. She envisioned a comprehensive center that offered holistic care with psychiatrists, therapists, coaches, dietitians, etc., a one-stop shop for patients. And I loved this vision. The problem was she built it all out on day 1. So she had a massive expensive office and multiple full-time staff that she was paying salary and benefits to. And she didn't have a single patient yet. And you know what? She didn't get any, because it turns out her target market didn't really care about having a one-stop shop for everything. She was so consumed with creating the practice that she didn't spend any time or money on marketing to get patients in the door, or even speaking to her potential patients to figure out what they actually wanted. After losing tens of thousands of dollars over the first few months, she folded the practice. Don't make this mistake. Instead of overbuilding on day 1, wasting time and money on complications you don't need that probably don't benefit your patients, start simple. Start lean, mean, and scrappy. You can always change things later. Nothing is irreversible. This means 1, malpractice insurance, of course, obviously. 2, an EHR with e-prescribed capabilities, especially if you have a telepsych practice or a hybrid telepsych in-person practice. You don't want to be like writing paper prescriptions. 3, a phone number and a professional email address. I highly recommend you don't get lazy and just use drsoandso@gmail.com. Spend the $12 a year to buy a domain name and have an actual branded email address. 4, a virtual fax number, because pharmacies don't yet know it's not 1995 anymore and they will fax you things. 5, a business bank account and merchant account so you can accept payment. Things you don't need: a lawyer, an accountant, a fancy logo, an expensive website that costs thousands of dollars. You can build your own V1 version of a website on Squarespace. You don't need a full-time office. If you want to have an in-person component to your practice, start off subletting part-time. You don't need staff. I could actually go on a whole side rant, and I will try to spare you about why hiring someone to outsource a task in your practice is the last step you should do. You should first, if you can, eliminate tasks, because there's a lot of tasks that actually don't need to get done, and there's no point in paying someone to do a task that you can just get rid of. Or two, automate it. Use one of the gazillion software solutions that exists out there to just have a software do it for you. And then only if you can't eliminate and automate do you hire someone. Okay, back to our main programming. To be honest with you, when I started my practice, I didn't even actually have those minimum features I described set up. I had an office but no furniture, no EHR because I was testing a few out, and no way to even bill my first patient. I hadn't even written office policies. I set all that up after I scheduled my first patient. Now, my situation was kind of unique because I was recovering from chemotherapy at the time, and you may not want to do it that chaotically. But I promise you, if you turn down the volume of your perfectionism, you will be able to make progress so much faster and so much easier. And the practice you build will be based on feedback from your patients of what they need, which will be better for you and for them in the long run. Moving along to strategy number 2, clarify your unique selling proposition. A unique selling proposition, or USP for short, is another concept I'm borrowing from the business world. It's a unique selling point or message that defines what makes a product or service different from and better than its competitors. It's a marketing concept that was first proposed in the 1950s by an advertising exec named Rosser Reeves. So let's say I'm a potential patient of yours interested in your practice. A USP answers the question for me, why should I choose you as opposed to any other psychiatrist? If you don't define that for your patients, trust me, they will define it for you, and they'll define it on terms you don't want. Because if you don't differentiate yourself, you will essentially be a commodity, no matter how highly trained you are. You'll be like a cup of coffee from any Joe Schmo coffee place down the street. And you don't want to be any old cup of coffee. You want to be Phil's coffee. You want to be handcrafted artisan coffee with art in the foam. You want people to drive out of their way and pay double because your coffee is so good. If you don't differentiate yourself, you will attract the worst kinds of patients. Those that are shopping based on cost rather than value, essentially looking for the cheapest psychiatrist, or those looking for a psychiatrist who has no boundaries and will answer their calls at all hours and just prescribe them as much Adderall or Xanax or whatever as they want. These are not the kinds of patients you want to be bringing in. Actually, a lot of people that I talk to when I'm coaching are afraid that they can't go into private practice because they will just attract those kinds of patients because they have stories from friends where that happened. And I'm like, yeah, the problem is your friend didn't differentiate themselves. So that's who they attracted, because they were just a commodity psychiatrist. Instead, you want to clarify your niche, deeply understand their problems, and position yourself as an expert with the knowledge and skills to solve their problems. This will make the marketing steps when you launch 1,000 times easier, because instead of trying to market to everyone that you do everything, you find your niche and speak directly to their struggles and the unique solutions that you offer. It can take some time and experience to flesh out a USP, but you'll know you've nailed it when you can answer these 4 questions. 1, who is your niche? 2, what are the problems they're struggling with? 3, how do you solve their problems? What outcome do you provide them? Because people pay for outcomes, not processes. As a slight side rant, I think this is sometimes a massive marketing problem with psychotherapy, especially psychodynamic psychotherapy, where you essentially are not promising the patient any kind of outcome. You're just saying, yeah, come to me 2 to 3 times a week for an hour and work with me for years, and maybe you'll get better, maybe you won't. It's a process. Like, that's not very appealing to a patient. If you can instead say, yeah, work with me and I'm pretty sure I will get you this outcome in this amount of time, that's what people pay for. Like, you're really asking a patient to suspend disbelief, to just pay you a whole bunch of money indefinitely for maybe the possibility they're gonna get better. And lastly, 4, what unique methods and frameworks do you use to provide your patients this outcome? What's essentially unique about the way that you practice psychiatry? Then you put it all together into a sentence or short paragraph that you feature at the top of your website above the fold, along with a photo so patients can, with a quick glimpse, get a strong sense of who you are, what you do, and what you're about. So for example, let's take a look at my website as an example. So here's my website, zenpsychiatry.com. You know, above the fold means prior to scrolling down. It's a term that comes from the newspaper industry. So essentially, you want the patient not to have to scroll down and to know a lot about you. So ancient wisdom meets modern medicine. That's kind of like my tagline. Hi, I'm Alana Miller, MD, and I believe that medicine equals science plus heart. I'm a psychiatrist passionate about integrating Western medicine, blah, blah, blah. I kind of already said this. I'm a cancer survivor who teaches the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love. And here's like a nice photo of me, you know? So at a quick glimpse, patients know who I am and what I'm about. Basically, I'm the integrative psychiatrist who survived cancer, and that experience infuses the care I provide my patients. Now, I have a lot more about myself and my practice philosophy on my website. I think I have hundreds of blog posts. But if a patient can't go to your website and tell within 10 seconds of being on the homepage the gist of who you are and what you're about and what you do, you're doing it wrong. A USB is kind of like your specialty or niche, but it's really much more than that. It can encompass your unique clinical background, your personality, your vibe, and your personal lived experience. I don't know about you, but I felt like when I was in training that it was considered a bad thing to have personal experience in the area in which you were treating patients, like it would lead to unchecked countertransference. I remember when I was going through chemotherapy in my cancer treatment, I was telling people I wanted to specialize in working with cancer patients when I was done with all this. And I was told I shouldn't do that because it would hit too close to home. Too close to home, like I was just going through my life forgetting that I had cancer, and suddenly working with a cancer patient would remind me, and I would immediately lose access to all of my faculties and the ability to think coherently and be helpful to my patients. Look, I understand people were well intentioned in their advice, but it was misguided, and I could not disagree more with the premise. I mean, who would be better at providing psychiatric care for cancer patients than a psychiatrist who had done it herself and come through the other side? Even my non-cancer survivor patients have told me they were attracted to me as a practitioner because while they may not be cancer survivors, they've experienced some sort of trauma or difficulty and felt that I would understand them and their experience, and I do. Your lived experience is your special sauce, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It makes practicing more fun, more impactful, more joyful when you're working with your favorite kinds of patients and using your unique skill set to really help them. So lean into your uniqueness. It's not a weakness, it's a superpower. Last but not least, strategy number 1, meld good business with good medicine by providing holistic care that respects patient belief systems. Let me get serious for a moment. There is a disease in the practice of psychiatry, and it is the siloing of mental health care between Western allopathic medicine and alternative medicine. A false dichotomy has been created between the Western and wellness communities that is perpetuated by both sides, and the victims are our patients. From my vantage point, there seem to be very few providers in our field who truly appreciate the nuanced and complex nature of health and wellness, especially the role of relationship framing and mindset in providing good psychiatric outcomes. Instead, we have two groups who, at their extremes, seem indoctrinated and nearly incapable of thinking in shades of gray. So I'll start with the alternative medicine side because we've all heard crazy things from that side. I probably don't have to belabor that point. That all pharmaceuticals are poison, you can cure any mental illness with manifestation in green juice. But I hear an unfortunate degree of black and white thinking from within the psychiatric community itself. So for example, I'll hear psychiatric providers say, all supplements are nonsense, none of it is evidence-based, none of it works. Really, none of it? There's not a single piece of evidence that any of it's helpful whatsoever. I can't even go on psychiatry Facebook groups anymore and talk about integrative psychiatry without wanting to gouge my eyeballs out when I see the misunderstandings and misinformation being thrown around. Integrative psychiatry is not alternative psychiatry. I practice standard of care medicine with extras. It's not green pharmacy or prescribing a supplement as opposed to a medication. I prescribe medication and I recommend complementary supplements. It's not functional psychiatry even. The discussion of functional psychiatry is a little outside the scope of this video, but to summarize, if you're thinking of it like a Venn diagram, you can think of integrative psychiatry as a big circle that encompasses the overall holistic approach, and functional psychiatry is a subset of that, a small circle within integrative psychiatry. No, integrative psychiatry is a way of evaluating and treating patients from a holistic framework, one that respects patient belief systems and appreciates that good outcomes in our field come from good relationships between clinician and patient. So it's a philosophy rather than any one specific modality. It's one, a way of assessing and treating a patient that encompasses all aspects of that person, mind, body, and spirit. It's two, patient-centered, personalized care that is respectful of patient belief systems. So an integrative provider customizes a treatment plan based on what the patient believes will work within reason. Let's be honest, a massive amount of the benefit we see from psychiatric interventions comes from the placebo effect. Have you ever seen a research study where the active treatment separated from placebo by like 10%, but the placebo group had a 40% improvement? Why are we obsessing about the 10% and ignoring the 40%? Why are we not optimizing for that? That's not wise. That's not evidence-based. As a side note, I'm writing a book right now, and doing my research for this book, I came across a study that showed that the impact of rapport on psychiatric outcomes. And so they had a bunch of psychiatrists who were providing medication management for patients, and they had outside observers rate the relationship between clinician and patient from a rapport building standpoint from like a 1 to 5 scale. What they found was that some psychiatrists, unsurprisingly, are just more skilled at building rapport with their patients than others. But you know what else they found? The psychiatrists most skilled at building rapport were more effective and had better outcomes prescribing placebos. The psychiatrists least skilled at building rapport were using prescription medication. So if we're practicing evidence-based medicine, we need to be focusing on the relationship. Number 3, integrative psychiatry treats patients as individuals, not as statistics. If the patient tells you a different story than what you've read in a textbook or research study, listen to the patient, not your textbook. This was a massive pet peeve of mine when I was in residency and I listened to attendings. It was rare, like most attendings were awesome, but every once in a while I'd hear someone tell a patient, yeah, what you're saying, your experiences, that's not happening to you because it's not in our research studies. Let's have a little bit of historical perspective. If you look back at how psychiatry was practiced, 80 years ago, it was barbaric, right? Not for any malintent, but it was just the mind is so complex. The way the mind intersects with the brain is so complex, even though it's technically one organ. We don't even really know how the brain creates consciousness, and it's just very complicated. So I would say the practice of psychiatry today is kind of like the practice of surgery was at the turn of the last century, when you were operating without anesthesia and using ether and there was no antibiotics. So in 100 years, we will look back how psychiatry is being practiced today, and it will seem kind of barbaric. And I don't mean that means we're doing anything wrong. We're doing the best that we can, but let's have some goddamn humility. We don't have all the answers, so let's listen to our patients. Now your question might be, yeah, this integrative psychiatry thing sounds interesting, but is it evidence-based? Well, I would encourage you to ask a little bit of a different question, a little bit more of a nuanced and sophisticated question, which is it evidence-informed? So what's the difference? Evidence-based medicine is binary, either yes or no. It's not nuanced. When someone says that's not evidence-based, I want to ask them, can you be a little bit more specific? Are you saying there's active evidence that it's harmful? Are you saying there isn't any evidence at all because it hasn't been studied? Are you saying there's evidence but it's mixed? Those are all very different things. And the next question becomes, if there's no evidence or it's mixed, what's the risk? An evidence-informed approach asks, what are the potential benefits measured against the potential costs, whether those costs are toxicity, side effects, money, time. Interventions with higher potential cost, toxicity, or side effects require a higher burden of proof before being recommended. So let's say within psychiatry, we're talking about ECT, atypical antipsychotic. On the other hand, interventions with low potential cost, toxicity, or side effects shouldn't require the same burden of proof. I don't need a Cochrane review before I recommend exercise for a patient, or meditation, or many low-risk nutraceuticals, especially if a patient believes it will work, because then I'm leveraging hope, expectation, and the relationship. And honestly, the placebo effect. I'm optimizing for that 40%. At worst, nothing will happen. At best, there will be some moderate benefit that I can layer on top of the benefits from medication. Integrative psychiatry is not about extremes, but about wisdom, common sense, and restoring balance. An integrative provider has a unique skill set and opportunity to cross the chasm in a way that allopathic and naturopathic only providers can't. Patients don't want to have to choose between two extreme viewpoints, either medication only from a psychiatrist or whatever it is they get from an alternative provider, rather than receiving care that is personalized and tailored to their unique needs and circumstances. And that includes all modalities that can be helpful, traditional and alternative. Now, the upside to all of this for you is, if you become one of those clinicians who's skilled at operating in the middle, who can prescribe Prozac but also knows how to do therapy, to recommend evidence-informed supplements, to counsel your patients on nutritional and mind-body interventions, to do it all wisely and moderately, you will have an endless supply of patients because there is a massive demand for this kind of psychiatry. One of the things I do for members of my mentorship program is share integrative protocols I created for all the common conditions and show you how to safely and effectively combine psychotropics, nutraceuticals, nutritional interventions, mind-body approaches, and psychotherapy with your patients without spending years and tens of thousands of dollars on a fellowship. A true measured integrative approach is rare, so just practicing integrative psychiatry alone is a differentiator. And if you combine that with your unique clinical and lived experience, you'll have a unique selling proposition that will have patients banging down your door to see you. So does this sound appealing to you? Does it make sense? If you're a psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse practitioner and you want to start your own practice to have complete autonomy over the kinds of patients you see, when you see them, and what you charge without burning out, to learn how to offer the integrative psychiatric care your patients desperately want without dropping $40,000 and years on a fellowship, to be surrounded by a community of like-minded practitioners, and to have the kind of impact that transforms your patients' lives, then click the link below to get your free training video on accelerating your private practice and learn more about my career mentorship program. You'll click that link, scroll to the bottom, enter your name and email, and you'll get immediate access to the video. And I'll also send you some follow-up tips about building a private practice in integrative psychiatry, including my high-yield integrative protocol for bipolar disorder. So here's that link again, and I'll see you there.